Hello, everybody. I'm Judy Wilson. This is Charles Joret, my accompanist, and my husband will join us just after the presentation begins. A few years ago, we came to see the Lincoln Museum, and we were interested because we had a Civil War presentation we were doing, wanted to learn more about Lincoln. And we were camping, and the lady at the campground said, "Oh, there's somebody you should talk to," and called Jeremy. And before we knew it, we were in Jeremy's office, and we had an invitation for the next year, which was COVID. And so reluctantly, we canceled it, and the next year got an email from Jeremy, "Sorry, still COVID." So the next year we thought, oh, this is it. We're going to do it. A week before we were supposed to present, Meredith got COVID. So we are here, safe and sound today, and we're delighted. In 2017, Meredith and I took our camper and traveled the Natchez Trace from Natchez, Mississippi to Nashville, Tennessee. Early settlers took their goods and floated down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to Natchez or New Orleans, where they sold their wares and their flatboats for lumber since they couldn't row back upstream on the Mississippi. They returned home on foot or on horseback along the 400-mile trace. Today, there's a scenic highway which follows the Natchez Trace. Along the way, we stopped at Civil War battlefields to see where Meredith's great-grandfather, James Davy, fought in the year 1863. Today, we want to take you back to 1860s. Trouble with the Union was brewing. Lincoln was running for president. Campaigners were singing "Lincoln and Liberty." Hurrah for the choice of the nation, our chieftain so brave and so true. We'll go for the great Reformation, for Lincoln and liberty too. We'll go for the son of Kentucky, the hero of Hoosierdom through. The pride of the sucker so lucky, for Lincoln and liberty Emancipation was dividing the country. Loyalties to the South were strong. The war started when Confederates bombarded Union soldiers at Fort Sumter, South Carolina, on April 12, 1861. Meredith's great-great-grandfather, James Davy, volunteered for the Union Army in October of '61 when he was 25 years old. Davy was born in England in 1836, and his family emigrated to Canada the next year. By the time he was 4, the family was living in Pleasant Mills, Adams County, Indiana. Davy's father died when he was 9. For the 4 years of his service in the Indiana 47th Regiment of the Union Army, he kept a diary contained in 4 small books, which we still possess and are on display over here, along with pictures and documents. This program features entries from the 1863 diary about the Battle of Vicksburg, read by Meredith, background information I read, with pictures and Civil War songs And I hope you all will join with me. I don't want to sing those by myself. The words will be on the screen.
I am James Davy. I was born in May of 1836 in northern Indiana. But I think you want to know about me now. Now I'm 27. I'm a member of the Union Army under General Ulysses S. Grant. Army of the Tennessee. It's the middle of the war. It's 1863. We're along the Mississippi in the Western Campaign. Join me and my comrades, Judy and Charles. You are now entering my life as a Union soldier in war.
We pick up Davy's story in February 1863. 1862 had seen many dismal failures by the Union Army and Navy to conquer the naturally fortified Vicksburg, situated on a 200-foot-high bluff on the Mississippi River. At this point in the war, all of the Mississippi's 2,000 miles were now under the control of the Union, except for 250 miles surrounding Vicksburg and the deltas to the north, which was controlled by the Confederates, enabling them to maintain a connection between the two halves of the Confederacy and at the same time to block river commerce north and south, essential to the Midwest. In the spring of 1863, General Grant is going to launch a springtime assault coordinating the Navy and the Army. During the winter months prior to that, he keeps his troops occupied with experiments to see if he can find another way to approach Vicksburg through the watery bayous. Our first diary entry is up here at Helena, Arkansas, with James Davy crossing the Mississippi River to Moon Lake. I'll show you on the map. Here's Helena. Eventually, the troops came down on the Louisiana side and then crossed over and fought their way back up, back east to Vicksburg.
February 25th, 1863. We are this morning in the state of Mississippi on Moon Lake. We left Helena about 4 a.m. in the morning, and it's very wet and unpleasant. We left Moon Lake at dark and went on our way down the Yazoo Pass. It's still continuing to rain.
The Yazoo Pass led to the Mississippi River.
February 26th. This morning, the entire fleet is on the move downstream. March 5th. This part of the world is entirely underwater.
Davy knew what he was told and what he saw, but he wasn't always aware of the larger picture. He was part of the Yazoo River expedition, which was the Union's effort to access Vicksburg using the backwaters of the bayous north of Vicksburg. To increase the water level for his gunboats, General Grant cut the Mississippi River levee, which flooded several bayous between the Mississippi and Tallahatchie rivers. That's why it seemed to Davy that the world was underwater. 22 transports with 5,000 troops, 2 ironclads, 2 rams, 6 light draft gunboats made up the first expedition, which was later reinforced with another brigade and additional vessels. It took several weeks to make the 200-mile trip, as the bayous were narrow and tortuous.
March 11th, we got to see the blazing ruins of a boatload of cotton. It had been set on fire to keep it from falling into our hands. The siege commenced today.
Davy was near Greenwood, Mississippi, where Fort Pemberton had been hastily built of cotton bales covered with earth, 14 feet high, which absorbed the artillery shells. It was armed with light artillery and manned by 1,500 men, was able to fire on vessels traveling north and south.
March 13th. This morning, the air is cold, and the sun appears as if it was dim with the horrors of the struggle that is about to take place between right and wrong. We're still on picket. The battle commenced at 10 a.m. and continued until night.
Yes, we're marching to the field, boys. We're going to the fight, shouting the battle cry of freedom, and we bear the glorious stars for the Union and the right, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor, up with the star. Will you rally round the flag, boys? We'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Very good.
March 15th. We took 2 spies yesterday. We shot one of them in the ass, and he died during the night. March 16th. We're busy preparing to make another attack upon the enemy's batteries. The cannonading commenced at the hour of 12 o'clock, and it continued until night. March 20th. We're now on our retreat back to Helena. The order was countermanded, though, and we're going to try it again. We met reinforcements. March 22nd. We're now on our way back to Fort Greenwood with reinforcements. I think as near as I can tell, our whole force will number about 10,000 in all.
Fort Pemberton was at Greenwood, Mississippi, so he calls the fort Fort Greenwood.
March 23rd. We're still on our way back to Fort Greenwood. 1 o'clock p.m., we came to our old camp, but have not yet landed. 5 shots from our gunboat and no reply, and 16 rebels taken.
To be taken prisoner was a serious situation. Provisions were hard to come by for both sides, and deprivation was rampant in the prison camps. In the prison cell we sit, we are waiting will come to open wide the iron door, and the hollow eye grows bright, and the poor heart almost gay, as we think of seeing home and friends once more. Tramp, 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 the boys are marching. Cheer up, comrade, they will come, and beneath the starry flag we shall breathe the air again of the free land in our own beloved home.
March 27th. Today, 4 companies of our regiment, and the 28th Wisconsin, and 1 company of cavalry and a small cannon. And we took a scout then to a small village called McNutt. We got 10 guerrillas. We returned to the boat at dark. March 29th. This was a very sad accident. Happened in our regiment last night. 4 men killed and 2 wounded by the fall of a tree. There is 10 men detailed out of our company for cannoneers. March 30th. We was ordered on board the steamer Moderator only this morning.
The Moderator was part of a fleet of gunboats that plied the Mississippi, trying to keep the supply routes open to the north.
April 2nd. Everything remains docile, but last night the rebels shot a full round from their fort with their heavy guns. This was done in order to keep our men from building a battery in front. April 5th. This morning we left the camp at Greenwood, bound for the Mississippi River, but we left the enemy in possession of their fort.
The federal fleet retired to the Mississippi. Grant had failed to reach Vicksburg by the Tallahatchie-Yazoo Pass.
April 7th. We're on our way to Helena. We got to the mouth of the Yazoo Pass about sunset, and we tied up for the night. April 12th. We're laying about 3 miles below Helena on board the steamer Moderator. We're now on our way to Vicksburg. April 16th, Milliken's Bend, Louisiana.
Milliken's Bend was a staging area about 15 miles northwest of Vicksburg.
This is a very hot day. This morning, our whole force started for Vicksburg by land. Our force numbers about 15,000 now, and that many started yesterday. We came to a small village by the name of Richmond, and we halted for the night.
Richmond, Louisiana had been recently occupied by Union forces.
April 17th. 5 o'clock this morning, we started again on our way. We marched about 10 miles nearer to the enemy and then came to a halt. We've gone through a very handsome part of the world. April 22nd. This has been a very muddy day, but notwithstanding the fall of rain last night, the weather's clear at present. This was a very serious night to pass without anything to keep us from the storm. April 23rd. This has been a very warm day, and the mud has dried out at last. The bridge is not completed yet, so we'll have to stay here a day or 2. The health of our regiment is very good. April 25th. The bridge is completed across the slough.
A slough is a swamp.
April 27th. This morning we left Nolan's plantation and crossed over the sloughs and came to the Mississippi River where our boats lay before Vicksburg. April 28th. This morning we're encamped on Perkins Plantation.
Perkins Plantation is now known as Somerset. After the Union forces' unsuccessful effort to defeat Fort Pemberton, they moved on down the Mississippi. Grant was trying to get east of Vicksburg by taking the long way around through Louisiana. Perkins Plantation had several hundred fine acres of campground, a riverfront with a good landing, making it an ideal place for assembling an army. Davy was in the 13th Corps, Army of the Tennessee. Its commander, General McClernand, had begun assembling his forces a week earlier.
We're now lying on the banks of the Mississippi, about 30 miles below Vicksburg. We are going over on the Mississippi State.
Davy was one of 24,000 troops ferried across the Mississippi in the largest amphibious operation ever conducted by an American force prior to World War II.
April 29th, the Battle of Grand Gulf. This morning we got on board the steamer Moderator, and we went down the Mississippi to a place called Grand Gulf, where the Black River forms a junction. Here the rebels have got heavy breastworks. Here was a hard fight between our gunboats, which lasted until about 2 p.m.
Admiral Porter led 8 ironclad river gunboats in an attack on the fortifications and batteries at Grand Gulf with the intention of silencing the Confederate guns and then securing the area with the troops of McClernand's 13th Corps. The gunboats attacked at 8 a.m. and continued until about 1:30 p.m. Davy's vessel, the Moderator, was one of 9 which remained in reserve. You can see the reserve ones over on the left. The Union gunboats successfully silenced the lower batteries of Fort Wade, but the upper batteries of Fort Coburn remained out of reach, continued to fire. The Union ironclads, one of which, the Tuscumbia, had been put out of action, and the transports drew off.
April 30th. This morning we got on board the gunboat and we went 16 miles down and landed in the state of Mississippi. We marched all night in the rear of the fort where the heavy cannonading was occurring all night. May 1st, the Battle of Magnolia.
At Port Gibson.
This morning we marched out into line of battle. A very hard fight took place. We drove them from their position at the point of the bayonet with great slaying after the 47th lay in heavy fighting for half a day.
Federal efforts to push rapidly inward were slowed because Davy's commander, General McClernand, he was a political appointee and inexperienced in the military. He had forgotten to issue rations to the men. Have you ever been in the Army? Despite the resulting delay, however, they moved onto the river bluffs unopposed and pushed rapidly towards Port Gibson. Davy's 12th Division, commanded by General Hovey, arrived and surged forward just as General Carr's men were storming the Confederate position. Chaos reigned. McClernand stopped to reorganize and then launched into a series of grandiose speeches until Grant pointed out that the Confederates had simply withdrawn to a more defendable position. With reinforcements, McClernand resumed the pursuit. With 20,000 men crowded into a 1.5-mile front, McClernand's plan appeared to be to just force his way past the Confederate line. Sundown found the two sides settling into a stalemate.
May 2nd. This morning we prepared to renew our attack, and we moved our whole force. But during the night, the enemy retreated across the Black River and burned the bridge to prevent our speedy advance. The bridge will have to be rebuilt before we can cross. May 3rd. This morning we started after the retreating force, came to a small stream named Cyber, where they tried to burn the bridge, but they failed.
The roads on the west bank of the Big Black River were now open all the way to Jackson, the Mississippi state capital, and a critical rail link to Vicksburg. Against this target, Grant poised his army to strike.
May 4th. This is a very hot day, but we're not marching, so we can lay in the shade and rest for today. The troops is pouring in by the thousands.
We are coming, Father Abram, 300,000 more, from Mississippi's winding stream and from New England's shore. We leave our plows and workshops, our wives and children dear, with hearts too full for utterance, with but a silent tear. We dare not look behind us, but steadfastly before. We are coming, Father Abram, 300,000 more. We are coming, our union to restore. We are coming, Father Abram, with 300,000 more. If you look across the hilltops that meet the northern sky, long moving lines of rising dust your vision may descry. And now the wind an instant tears the cloudy veil aside, and floats aloft our spangled flag in glory and in pride. And bayonets in the sunlight gleam, and bands brave music play. We are coming, Father Abram, 300,000 more. We are coming, our union to restore. We are coming, Father Abram, with 300,000 more.
May 8th. General Grant had a grand review of this army today. He was accompanied with field and staff officers. It was a splendid sight. May 10th. This morning we started again on another march, but on the account of the large army that there is to move, we did not go more than 9 miles. Dust and heat made this day's march a very tedious one. May 11th. We had the pleasure of remaining in the shade today, so we got along very well. The troops are pouring in by the thousands. General Sherman came in with another Army Corps. May 12th. This morning we advanced about 8 miles nearer to the rebels with heavy skirmishing in front, with infantry and artillery. We drove the enemy slowly and are now encamped on their picket line. May 13th, the Battle of Jackson, Mississippi. This morning we advanced 6 miles and drove the rebels, and we had heavy skirmishing, but we drove them. Then we marched about 6 miles and camped for the night.
On May 9th, Confederate General Johnston received a dispatch from the Confederate Secretary of War directing him to proceed at once to Mississippi and take chief command of the forces in the field. As he arrived in Jackson on this day, May 13th, Johnston consulted with the local commander, General Gregg, and learned that only about 6,000 troops were available to defend the town. Johnston ordered the evacuation of Jackson, but Gregg was to defend Jackson until the evacuation was complete. By 10 a.m., both Union Army Corps were near Jackson and had engaged the enemy. Rain, Confederate resistance, poor defenses prevented heavy fighting until about 11 a.m. when the Union forces attacked in numbers and slowly but surely pushed the enemy back. In mid-afternoon, Johnston informed Gregg that the evacuation was complete and that he should disengage and follow. The Federal troops burned much of the town. The fall of the beautiful former Mississippi state capital was a blow to Confederate morale.
May 14th. This morning we started about 4 o'clock to another point, and from the heavy rain that fell during the night, caused our march to be very tiresome. At 10 o'clock we came to a small village named Raymond, where our men had another fight and we drove the enemy.
Confederate General Gregg underestimated the size of the Federal force. His forces at Raymond were overrun by the Union, and he was forced to evacuate to Vicksburg.
May 15th, Clinton. This morning we came to the railroad that runs from Vicksburg to Jackson in this state. And then we took a northeast course to another village called Bolton, where we expect to have a fight. May 16th, the Battle of Champion Hill. Another desperate struggle for our glorious cause, in which laid thousands of our good boys in their grave. And my comrades fell on my right and on my left. Only the God in heaven brought me through safe.
When Grant arrived at Champion Hill, he ordered the attack to begin. McClernand's corps attacked on the left, McPherson's on the right. Confederates attacked, pushing the Federals back. However, they were too few to hold the position. Grant now counterattacked, committing Davy's forces that just arrived from Clinton by way of Bolton. Late in the afternoon, the Confederates fell back to a defensive position at the Big Black River in front of Vicksburg.
Captain Sam Byers, 5th Iowa Infantry, he reported, for over an hour, we loaded our guns and we killed each other as fast as we could. I've been in greater battles than Champion Hill, but only once did I see two lines of blue and gray stand close to each other and fire into each other's faces for an hour and a half.
Champion Hill was a bloody and decisive Union victory. The Battle of Champion Hill was a pivotal battle in the Vicksburg campaign, leading inevitably to the Siege of Vicksburg and their surrender.
May 17th, one day later. This morning, my heart bled with sorrow to view the horrible scenes of a hard-tested battlefield, which was strewn with our dead, and the enemy was laying with our dead fully as thick.
Professor Bishop, in his book, Mississippi's Civil War Battlefields, quotes General Hovey, division commander, as saying, "It was the hill of death. Men, horses, cannon, and debris scattered in wild confusion. Colonel Slack, Indiana's 47th Infantry commander, described the battle as an event unequal, terrible in point of fierceness and stubborn persistency, finding but few parallels in the history of civilized warfare. Union losses in this one day were about 2,500. Confederates suffered about 3,800. The 47th Regiment, Davy's regiment alone, lost 143 men. 8 of Davy's comrades from Decatur and Pleasant Mills died in this battle. In his personal memoir, Grant observed, "While a battle is raging, one can see his enemy mowed down by the 1,000 or the 10,000 with great composure. But after the battle, these scenes are distressing, and one is naturally disposed to alleviate the sufferings of an enemy as a friend."
May 18th. We've had a pleasant day's rest. We're making preparations for another fight in front of Vicksburg. May 19th. We left camp about 2 p.m. and crossed the Black River. We hit at dark and camped for the night. There's been heavy cannonading all in the direction of Vicksburg. May 21st. We marched nearly all night. We was within about 6 miles of Vicksburg, and then we had to go back to the bridge we left and destroy it to prevent a dark being on our rear. May 22nd, the Battle of Vicksburg. There has been a very hard day's fighting in Vicksburg. There has been one of as heavy a day's cannonading as I ever heard.
Direct assaults on the Confederate fortifications on May 19th and 22nd ended in heavy Union losses. Grant lost 3,199 men, killed, wounded, or missing. Confederate casualties couldn't have exceeded 500.
May 25th. This morning we marched within about 200 yards of the rebels' fortifications, and we skirmished with them until about 4 p.m. when the fort sent out a flag of truce for us to come in and bury our dead that was killed the day before.
Actually, some bodies had lain there for 6 days since May 19th, and the odor was overwhelming. For 2.5 hours, troops on both sides mingled as the dead were buried.
May 26th. The battle commenced as soon as we could see where to direct our firing. We succeeded in blowing up one of the enemy's magazines. It was a hard sight. May 28th. The weather is extremely hot. The battle still rages night and day, but we are laying in camp taking a rest to prepare to go out and march into the battlefield again tomorrow.
We're tenting tonight on the old campground. Give us a song to cheer our weary hearts, a song of home and friends we love so dear. Many are the hearts that are weary tonight, waiting for the war to cease. Many are the hearts looking for the right to see the dawn of peace. Tenting tonight, tenting on the old campgrounds. We're fighting today near the old campground. Many are lying near. Some are waiting for the war to cease. Many are the hearts looking for the right to see the dawn of peace. Tenting tonight, tenting tonight, tenting on the old campground.
May 29th. This morning at 9 o'clock, we was called out into line of battle to march out into the battlefield to face the enemy once more, to risk our lives for our glorious cause. The heaviest cannonading I ever heard. May 31st. The God in heaven still smiles on us while in this desperate struggle, although we are momentarily exposed to the enemy's firing and facing their deadly missiles. About 4 o'clock this morning, we was roused from our beds of rifle pits by heavy cannonading all around our whole line. I took up my position on one of the highest hills to view the scene before the light of the sun would make it so light that the flashes would be dimmed. And all our line was as one constant fire. Our cannon was everyone in action all along the whole line. June 2nd. This morning we had again to march out to our entrenchments to face the enemy. 48 hours exposed to their deadly fire. Today I had my gun knocked out of my hand by a spent ball that had hit a box which I was behind. June 5th. Another day's rest, for it was something we need very bad. Today makes 19 days steady fighting. The roar of cannon is constant in our ears. June 10th. This morning we again took our turn in the rifle pits before our enemy. But very little was done on the account of the heavy fall of rain, which continued during 24 hours that we was on duty. June 11th. This morning we returned to camp in a very wet condition, and our camp was knee-deep in mud, and part of our nests had floated downstream.
While Davy was miserable in his camp, things were desperate in Vicksburg because of the siege. Disease was rampant, medicine was in short supply, rations for the troops were cut over and over again until the garrison was issued only a handful of peas and rice per day, per man. Water was rationed and the citizens had retreated to caves because of the constant shelling. Many civilians fell victim to the incoming shells. Let us pause in life's pleasures and count its many tears, while we all sup sorrow with the poor. There's a song that will linger forever in our ears. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times, no more. Many days you have lingered my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more.
June 13th. Nothing but the constant roaring of the cannon can be heard, and the whistling of the balls as they cut their way through the air. This morning, one of our company was killed while he was in bed.
That was Robert Thompson of Decatur, Indiana.
June 14th. This morning, we took our turn in the rifle pits. About 2 p.m., the enemy attempted to make a charge, but as soon as they made their appearance, our men opened out and drove them back into their nests. June 16th. It appears as if the very earth was getting ready to cave under the terrific shocks of our cannon. The Rebs are shelling our camp, but they have done no injury yet. June 18th. This morning we again resumed our position in the entrenchments to face the enemy 24 hours longer. We had one man slightly wounded. Ben Jones was his name.
Ben Jones was also from Decatur. He was in Company A.
June 19th. The birds sang their cheerful songs while the dreadful roaring of the cannon and explosion of shell drove all those pleasant scenes from our mind. The heat continues to increase. June 24th. About 10 a.m., I had a turn of the ague. Heavy cannonading occurred all last night.
Ague is malaria with fever and shivering.
June 27th. Our regiment was in the entrenchments today. The after part of the day, dreadfully hot. July 1st. I returned in from picket this morning, but old Joe Johnson did not disturb us. But he's very much expected. As for other news, it is scarce.
The Confederate general he mentioned, Joe Johnston, was sent by President Jefferson Davis to support General Pemberton at Vicksburg, but he arrived too late to have an effect. It was a crucial mistake. He hesitated because he thought he didn't have enough troops to conquer the enemy. Davis dismissed him because of this, but reinstated him the next February.
July 2nd. This morning we went into the entrenchments to pass another day of shooting at each other. It was a serious little fight took place last evening in front of our rifle pits. The enemy was driven back into their fort. July 3rd. We remained in the pits all night and then returned to camp early this morning. We had 2 men wounded last night during the skirmish. A flag of truce. July 4th, 1863. This morning our men are busy engaged in firing a salute, but no fighting's going on this morning. General Grant has given them until 8 o'clock to surrender. And if not, then the engagement's to come again. The surrender of Vicksburg at 8 o'clock.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Truth is marching on. Vicksburg was the climax of Grant's Vicksburg campaign. Lincoln remarked, "The Father of Waters again goes unvexed to the sea." The next day, Davy complained that he was sick again.
July 5th. This morning, a portion of our army started back to the rear to give old Johnson another whaling, and our regiment was part of that number to go. But I remained in camp, for I was unwell, along with a number of other boys. July 12th.
A week later.
Out of whack. July 17th.
5 days later.
This morning I started after the regiment. Got to the Black River about noon. July 18th. A lonesome march. Dangerous, for the Rebs are aplenty. July 19th. I got to Jackson this morning. I got to the regiment about 1 o'clock. July 21st.
Only 2 days later than when he arrived.
This morning, our whole force started back to Vicksburg. August 1st. We're ordered down the river. August 2nd. This morning we embarked on a marine boat and started down the river, and in the afternoon we landed at a splendid town called Natchez, where everything is plentiful.
Natchez really is a beautiful river town. It's known for its lavish mansions. Davy and other Union forces occupied Natchez after the fall of Vicksburg. Natchez is known for these beautiful antebellum homes, which belonged to wealthy plantation owners. Stanton Hall is the largest and most lavish mansion. It really does take up a whole city block. Choctaw Hall served as Union headquarters. There is a city cemetery there that includes a Confederate section. The hammer keeps a-ringing on somebody's coffin. The hammer keeps a-ringing on somebody's coffin. Way over in the new burying ground. Somebody's dying way over yonder. Somebody's dying way over yonder. Way over in the new burying ground. 2 years later, Davy recorded getting bad news. He got it 2 weeks after it happened.
April 21st, 1865. Sad news, sad news. The death of President Lincoln came to our ears. This cast a dark shade over all our late victories.
Be silent, there cometh on spirit wings sped the wail of a nation in grief for the dead. The strong and the mighty from glory and light hath waned in his brightness and left us in night. The proud eagle banners all droopingly wave, and the wild winds are hushed round the president's grave, and the wild winds are hushed round the president's
April 25th, 1865. The hearts of our soldiers somewhat revived from the late news that the Secretary still survives.
After the Battle of Vicksburg, Davy was promoted to sergeant. You can see he proudly wears his sergeant stripes. He was discharged in October 23, 1865, having fought at last in the Mobile Bay campaign. He returned to Decatur, Indiana, and married Mary Rice in 1866, and eventually moved to Spiceland, Indiana. They had 3 daughters, Elta Florence, Marianetta, and Lizzie. He died in 1899 at the age of 63, having long suffered from that malaria that he contracted at Vicksburg. Marianetta had a daughter, Ethel Irene, who had a daughter, Veda Louise, who had a son, Meredith. Davy's daughter, Lizzie, died at 3, and Elta died at 20. But Marianetta, his great-grandmother, lived to the age of 95, dying in 1963. Meredith lived next to his great-grandmother and knew her until she died when he was in college.
She was born 3 years after Lincoln was shot. She lived to see astronaut John Glenn. She knew everything from Custer's Last Stand to astronaut John Glenn and everything in between.
We close with the Shokin Farewell. You may remember this tune from Ken Burns' Civil War series.
indicated before, we are going to open up for question and answer sessions.
This poem or song, did James Davy write many songs or poems?
This is the only one we have found. Yeah.
This was in the diary, and it is inconsistent with his writing, except for when he was really emotional. So we don't know anything about it other than he included that written by hand in his diary.
Could you repeat the question?
The question was, the poem that's up here, did he write a lot of them? We don't know, other than this one was in the diary. He was very terse, actually, in his entries. He was a farmer, so almost every entry included a weather report. The question is about the memorial. There were two other names on that memorial, and were they related, or who were those people?
Joshua was his younger brother. The other one, we don't know. How many troops were around Vicksburg when it fell? Believe it or not, General Grant had 60,000 troops there.
You may have, sorry.
The Confederate troops were a much smaller group inside the fort. I think, if I remember right, about 24,000.
We have been surprised at the numbers that we're fighting. I guess I thought, since it was the Civil War and so long ago, it was a smaller thing. But there was the constant problem in the South of not having enough troops. They really were overrun by the Northern troops. Grant's
shall I say, strategy by taking Vicksburg was to cut the South in half and to be able to stop all of the supporting troops coming from Texas, along with the Texas beef and that kind of thing. So when Judy was talking about the fact that 143 men from his regiment died in one 4-hour battle, that 8 of those were from his own town. The reason that kind of thing happened was there was no draft, and so when recruiters came to town, all of the boys just re-upped. And so if they got into a battle, then the town could lose many of their sons. Did James Davy's younger brother Joshua survive the war? Yes, he did. And James Davy was never wounded, but he got malaria in the trenches and the swamps, and that lasted all the rest of his life. He died at 63 of complications from malaria.
Had Grant been promoted to commanding general by this point?
Yes, he had not. He was in command of the Western campaign, but once he won Vicksburg, then Lincoln made him commander-in-chief of all the forces. And then most of the rest of things occurred, except for Mobile Bay in Alabama. The rest was occurring along the eastern shore, down through Richmond, Atlanta, and all of that, which he commanded.
You can imagine how hard it was on Johnston to have Vicksburg fall, just within days of when he was supposed to arrive. And he was late, and he was worried that he didn't have enough men to defend, and he probably didn't. But it did cost him his position, at least until the next winter, when they were desperate enough to reinstate him.
Davy was in 11 battles in all 4 years of the war, and as I say, never wounded. But his last battle, interestingly enough, was at Mobile Bay in Alabama. There were 2 battles there, Fort Blakely and Spanish Fort. And those battles occurred after the surrender of Appomattox. And the reason was that the word did not get down to Mobile in time.
She's talking about the tunnels that were dug towards Vicksburg from where they fought, correct?
There were a lot of men that died in that attempt. Yes, a lot of men died.
And
A
the
lot of Union soldiers.
tunnels were blown up, weren't they?
Well, there was a tunnel blown up when they tunneled in and packed it full of explosives trying to get one of the magazines, which they did, and it made just quite an explosion, but it did not totally breach the fort. They had to starve it out finally. Grant decided that he was losing too many men in frontal assaults, and so he ended up just sieging the place and starved them out.
The question is, where do the food and supplies come from? There were train rails, and they depended on them. At one time, after this Vicksburg campaign, life wasn't all exciting battles for him. It was mostly boring stuff. But he was posted to guard the railroad tracks.
She wondered if this gun was an heirloom. This is a funny story. My dad, he was a carpenter contractor, and he did both house framing and finish work, and he did also cabinetry work. So in his basement, which had a nice fireplace, he wanted to hang a gun over the mantle. So he carved that out himself. But if you'll see where this ends here, underneath is a wood piece. That was not there. This was done as a shotgun.
It doesn't fire. Dad would never have been able to get a gun into the house, I assure you.
Mom would never let me. But anyway, so I created this extra piece underneath to make it a full length. I cut this base down, and then I made these pieces of plate and the hammer out of furnace metal. And then in a town close to us, I found that is an actual Civil War bayonet. So I made it to look just like he used an Enfield rifle. And an Enfield rifle, they were made in England and sent over. So this is to be as close as I could get to a replica of what he would have used. The uniform I have was made for me in California to represent the exact uniform that he would have worn.
And we try to imagine what it would be like in all that heat and rain and mess that he was in a uniform like that. It's hard to believe.
Oh my, it's all real.
The question is about his education. We, of course, don't know for sure, but translating the diaries was very, very difficult. It was the diary that was up there, the page that was there at the beginning was pretty readable. As he became more and more depressed at times, during down times, his handwriting went down too. His English wasn't perfect. He was born in England, but came over here shortly after that. We don't know about his education. I don't think he had a lot of education. I think that, he was the typical Indiana farm boy who went off to war and stayed off to war. His father had died.
Yes,
At
his
9.
father died at 9, when he was
And
9.
There were brothers and there was a step family, and he went home once during the war, and that was it. And he slogged out all 4 years.
You could see what he looks like after 4 years of war.
The question is about the diaries. If we actually knew that they were there, or did we just run across them? We always knew they were there. Meredith's mother was big on family, and she saved everything, and so we knew they were there. But she was quite a collector, and it took us about 3 months to empty out her house, which was behind our house. Dad and she helped us build our house. We actually did it. And then they built their house 6 years later. So we would go over every day, and get rid of a few more things or find some good home for it. And we could not find the diaries. We knew they were there. So at the very last minute, we found the diaries in a file cabinet that was in the basement. Probably not the best place to store the diaries.
He wrote 4 diaries. We have all 4 diaries. They've been archived in the Indiana History Center, and we still retain the originals. One of the originals, this one for Vicksburg, is actually right there on the table. And we have a photocopy of a number of the pages, which you can turn and look at and
Over on the table.
try to interpret. That's his original. The larger of the certificates is his promotion to sergeant. And on the right-hand side in the little frame is the original discharge. When we went to Vicksburg to learn more about the campaign, we went to the visitor center, and I took that original discharge with me, and I said, here's his original discharge. And behind the desk, they said, just a moment. They went to the computer and came back with 4 pages on him.
At that time, we didn't know anything about him, other than we had the diaries.
Yeah, they have the records of all of his battles. They have the record of all of his commanders and all of the places he was, including his promotions and the whole thing. I couldn't believe it. Yeah. Yeah.
What started you putting this all together? It's been wonderful. It really has. Just like you were there.
I taught music for 30 years, and part of what I had to do at a private school where I was 18 years there was put on pageants. And if there was one thing I knew, it was how to make up a program. So we went down just for a vacation to
Panama City. And then we came back through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To the Parkway, Natchez Parkway. And we had a diary with us, but we never really opened it. Meredith I said, let's go on the Natchez Trace. And we had a camper. He said, well, I think my great-great-grandfather fought at Vicksburg. And I thought, oh, yeah, well. So he brought the Civil War diary, and we sat at our little table in our camper, and each night, during the day we'd go see the battleground, and at night we'd try to make our way through the diary. And we got home and we had pictures. A lot of these slides were our pictures of places we've seen. And we realized, what I said was that he knew what he saw. He knew his own experience, but he didn't know any of the strategy or what was happening around him or the larger picture. So we started researching just step by step of what he said, where he was, who he said he saw. And I thought, you know what, this would make a program. Why don't we do a program? And my dear friend Charles, who's been with me for so many years accompanying, agreed to accompany, and he came up with the first place, his Mormon church, that we could do the program. We did it there, and we did it at my church, and I thought that was it. But each time we've done it, somebody has come up and said, you really need to do this program at such and so, and they arranged it. So we've probably done it 20 times now, but we never set out to do a program. It just sort of happened. But you know, it's like cleaning house when company comes. If you have company 3 times, your house gets really clean. And we just kept researching. And the second time, we went down to Mobile Bay, and we stood on the place where he fought, just as we did in Vicksburg. And it's just an amazing story to us. And because he was the grandfather of Meredith's, he was the father of Meredith's great-grandmother, and Meredith knew his great-grandmother so well, he's a real person to us. You know, we talk about him, and we remember him as we remember Meredith's family. But it's been quite an experience. And old Charles here has just drug along with us everywhere we go.
If you're wondering about this picture of the eagle, we did a program earlier this year for the American Legion in his community. And afterward, they gave that to us. It's embroidered. It's not a painting. It's not a photograph. It's an embroidery.
It's in the regimental flag style. So each regiment might have its own flag, and they might list the battles. And it was a very individual thing. Those are very rare now. This is not a regimental flag, but it's in that style.
Yeah. There is a book on the table over there, 47th Regiment, Indiana Volunteers. And in that book, we found the death of 4 and the wounding of 2 from the fall of a tree. We found the one about the fellow who was killed in his bed. Each of the things that we found in the diary, we found in that scholarly book.
Yeah. We did a program once, it was at a retirement center near us. We're from Indianapolis. At a retirement center near us, and a man came in before we ever said a word, and he said, "You won't believe it. My relative was in the Civil War, and he was in a regiment where a man was killed by a tree."
The question was, were there any military benefits for James Davy because of his illness? And there were not, because he was not shot. Yeah.
However, there were a lot of associations of Civil War people that had fought, soldiers. And there was an observance on the circle. Years later, we have pictures of that. So he remembered his soldier days, and it was a part of his life. The question is, what profession does Meredith have?
I was a banker. I was with 5 banks and never moved my desk. Throughout all the mergers, I started out with Indiana National. I ended up retiring from J.P. Morgan Chase. Yeah. So, and Judy.
Charles was head librarian in Lebanon, Indiana.
Yes.
At Kokomo.
Yeah. And he is not only a musician, but he teaches music. Yeah. And Judy teaches music, but she was a violinist. At one time, she was assistant concert mistress of the Indianapolis Philharmonic. She has toured with the Indianapolis Symphony Choir all over the world. She sang at the Great Wall of China, at World Expo in Shanghai, at the Vatican in Rome, at the Kennedy Center.
And it's very inconvenient when I cough during those performances, like I did today. Any other questions? The questions is about statues that are being removed, and how do you feel about that? I will say before he answers that, I told him I'm from Louisville, and Meredith is from Indianapolis. And I said, you know, when this started, I said, you just better darn well be glad it was your grandfather and not mine that fought the Civil War.
I have no problem with it. I'm a Union soldier. Yeah, that is a difficult. It takes away people understanding what happened. And I think we need to remember both the bad and the good.
I can make a strong argument for Lee and for some of the people whose statues have been removed and taken down. But on the other hand, I'm not on that side that's offended. I don't realize, I don't have that daily experience of what it must be to experience things that would make me want to take those statues down, to walk by them and feel less. And I don't have that personal experience. So, you know, if they can find an appropriate place for those statues, then maybe that's the best thing to do. I didn't feel that originally, but I do now.